So let's see what we can do with the MCP server. From what I understand, the MCP plugin is a little bit more highly anticipated than I thought it was going to be. Let's go ahead and just dive in. The first thing I need to do is change my directory. So I'm going to go to my tutorial content, which I have a whole repo or a whole directory of tutorial repos. And then I'm going to do pnpx create payload app, and I'm going to set this to be MCP server, and I'll use the website template with a MongoDB and let that create. And as that's being created, I can open the project in WebStorm, which I'll do right now. The main thing I want to call attention to here is this MCP plugin RFC, the request for comment. And so what this is telling us is a lot of the information that will make its way into the documentation but has not made it yet because this is in beta. So if you are looking to get started in the MCP server plugin, make sure you read this documentation first. So some of it is in the documentation, which is what we'll be using, but the thing that's not is getting the plugin for your IDE or whatever AI you plan on using. So I want to use Claude. And I can see here that I've got Claude code. So we're going to come back to this because I haven't generated an API key yet. So we're going to configure the MCP plugin. Then we're going to come back in and set up how the IDE or AI is going to communicate. So now we're going to go to the documentation for the MCP plugin, and we're going to install it. So we run the command pnpm add plugin MCP. So I can open my terminal, install that. And now that that's installed, we can open up our payload config, which is under source. So now in payload config, we can import this. We're going to import MCP plugin from our plugin MCP, and then down in our plugins array, we need to add MCP plugin, and we're going to set our collections. We're just going to include our posts and just say enabled and set it to true. And now that that's set to true, we can see that the description is missing, and description is required for each of these. So I'll say MCP server connection for posts. When I save this, that error should go away. And now I should be able to run pnpm dev and go to our admin page. Now that that page has loaded, I'm using another database that already exists, so I should just be able to do my login. We can scroll down and we see API keys. And when I click on that, I can create a new API key and enable it. And we're going to come back to this. We will need this, and I can just use my name. I'm the user. I don't need a label, but I can just say test MCP API. Description is fine. And then I want to be able to find and update and create. Sure, we'll also delete our posts. So we'll just enable all of this. So now what we just did is we enabled the plugin. And so we enabled it just for posts. So you might think that enabling here will just automatically enable all of these on the back end, but that's not true. For example, if we wanted to just control in a more fine-tuned kind of way, we could just set find to true and let the rest be false. And then we need to set a description here. And now if I save this and save my API key, we'll see that pages show up too. And the reason why the enabled doesn't just enable everything is because you want to be able to fine-tune configure each of these. So we can enable find pages and hit save. And now we can get set up with, for my case, Claude code. So I'm going to first go to the MCP plugin documentation, and then I'm going to change directory to my MCP server project. And then I'm going to write in Claude MCP add transport HTTP payload HTTP, and then I'll just copy this example of 127.0.0.1.3000 API MCP, and then we'll say a header. And in that header, we need an authorization, which will be bearer. and then put in the API key I copied. And now I'm not publishing this project, so I don't care if my API is exposed here. Now, if I hit enter, I have a typo. I missed the flag here. So again, this is Claude MCP add. It's 2 hyphens for the flag for transport. And now I can see that the MCP server for payload with URL here has been added to my local config with the authorization there. So now I should be able to go into Claude. And then if I look up MCP, I can see payload right there as I named it. Perfect. So now I should be able to say, list all of my pages. And then it'll say payload find pages. So this is using the MCP server. And I can see that here because it's the tool use, and I can hit yes. And I can see that I have 2 pages. Find me the most recent post. So now I can see that the most recent post is called About Me and was made on October 29th. Now I can tell it to delete that post. And it's now using payload delete posts. And now I don't have to create a script. I don't have to go into my admin UI at all. My MCP server is taking care of all of it. So we've done read, which is find. We've done delete. So let's create a new post that's just a placeholder, use lorem ipsum text. And so now we can see that it is generating this page using a tool, which is our post create post tool. And now if I go over to my admin UI, I can go to my posts and I see lorem ipsum placeholder. And I can see everything that was just generated today at 7:20 p.m. Eastern. So we've done a lot of the basic usage here. So we have added the plugin to our plugins array. We've gone through to add collection, which requires both slug and description. So you can override both the data generated by the LLM and the response provided by the LLM from its operation tool call. So we've already talked about also enabling, which takes an object or a Boolean, which we talked about both. So the Boolean being true here, and then the object, you can include find, create, which I will just write this out explicitly so you can see it. Then we will have update as false, and then finally delete as false. And so these are all the options you can choose for your MCP server to communicate with your collections. And so we just covered all of those there. You can also choose to disable the MCP plugin. So conditionally, if you would like to not have it running during production or not running during development, you may be able to set it up that way. You can override the API key collection. And just looking at the documentation, that does have an example for us right here. We can just get the collection, and then we're going to, in the collection, add fields push, and we're going to name it department, which will be a select type field, which will have options, and that will have one option being development, and we'll do marketing here as well. And then below this, we can return our collection, add a comma, and then if we open up our API key collection, I can now see department here with development and marketing. So if you wanted to keep track of who has which API key, you can do that here as well. So you can define some options with your MCP. The first option is tools. So in tools, you can include a name, a description, a handler, and parameters. Then you have prompts, which can also have a name, title, description, handler, and args schema. And then resources, which will have name, title, description, handler, URI, and MIME type. And then you can also include handler options for your MCP, which will have a base path, verbose logs if you want verbose logs to be logged to the console. Otherwise, it is defaulted to false, so you need to enable it to true. And then finally, there are server options. So you can provide some server info for the MCP server, the name of the MCP server, and then the version. So all of these are defaults. And since that's the easier one, why don't we start there? So we're going to set our MCP, and then we're going to use server options. So the server options takes an object, and we're going to give it our server info, which is going to be another object, and that will have a name of test MCP server, and a version, which we'll just set to be 001, just so it's different from the original. This information is primarily going to be internal. So whatever you want to name your server and the version of your server, feel free to change that. So they recommend here in the RFC to use very precise descriptions of your collections here. So for an example, we can just do something like, this posts collection contains a variety of blogs on different topics about web development. All right, and then this one will be the pages collection is where I house all of my businesses data. Rookie mistake there. Businesses data like the about me and home pages. Great, so that should help. We can have different tools here. If we do within MCP, we can add a tools array, which will have an array of objects. We'll call this one name of give me a number. And so this will just give a random number between 1 and 50, just to give an example. So we'll have a handler that takes args, which will have a record of string and unknown. We'll do constant of number is equal to args dot numbers. So as a number, or 50. We need to have a comma up there. Then we can have the result, which will be math floor, do math random plus 1. Should be able to do times 50 here for that. And then we're going to return a promise that resolve with content. And that content will have an object, and we'll scroll this down a little bit here. And that content will have a type, which will be text as constant, and then text will keep this here, number guess result, some white space, bold, number will be result. And so now we need to provide beneath our handler some parameters. The parameters will be a Zod object, and here we don't have Zod installed, so we need to fix that. And here is a key thing to keep in mind. So we are going to add Zod, which is going to install the latest version, which is not a version that we can use for the MCP server quite yet. That's not on Payload, that is on Zod, but a fix is coming soon. So we're going to set this to be 3, should be 0.25, 0.76, which is the newest stable release for 3.25, and then run p and pmi. And then we have the correct version of Zod, where we can then import Z from Zod and have no issues going forward here. In here, we're going to have number, I think numbers is what it needs to be, and this will be Z number int min of 1, max of 50. Sure, it'll be optional. Default will be 50. And to give it a little description here, we'll describe, make this a little cleaner to read. Describe will say something like number to guess. And then at the end of this, we can add shape. And so now I'm giving this too easy of a task, and I have number up here, which is something that I need to have as a way to tell it what to give me. So I can say that a max value here can just be times number and say something like, give me a random number between 1 and a number I set. And we'll say a max of 100 up to 100. And now this should take a user input. So content needs to be an array, and then inside the array needs to have an object. That object needs to have type and text, and then that means this doesn't need to be there. That does though. Perfect. So first, let's go to MCP. I don't see this as a new tool, so that means that we should need to, let's do payload generate types, and then run pnpm dev, then restart Claude here. And then let's go look at our MCP and see after this connects that we now have 6 tools instead of 5. And if I scroll down, I can see give me a number. So give a random number between 1 and a number that I set up to 100. And it tells me what parameters I have and describes it. So that describe option that I selected here tells Claude what this does. So now, if I do run tool, give me a number, this should still run with the default of 50. There we go. We can see 50 right there. I can hit yes, and it gives me 14. And now if I say, give me a number, 99, we now have this random new tool that shows me a random number whenever I need it. So there are ways to make this more useful, but this is just one way to get something up and running. So that covers our MCP tools. Now, if we go down and we look at prompts, we see an example here for prompts as well. So we can think of this maybe as instructions, but let's try this example first. So I'm going to add prompts, which also takes an array of objects, which will have a name. We'll use this example exactly. We'll echo with our arg schema of message being a Zod string, and then a description, which again we'll say creates a prompt to process a message, and then title it echo prompt. We will come up with a better example here in a minute. Then we'll need our handler, which will take a function, which will have our message, which will take a string, message string. Then we will use our messages here as an array. And within it, we'll need our content, which will have a type of text. And the text will be, please process this message. And that will say message. Underneath content, we can add role of user. So the role that we just set here of user comes from the MCP documentation. So you can either choose user or assistant. So the role indicates the speaker between either the user or the assistant. And the content is one of the following types, which is going to be the text content that we said. You can also use image and audio as well as embedded resources. So all of this information here from the content, the type, the text, the role, all of that comes from the MCP specifications. It's not payload specific. So now if I get back to this, I have this message that should just echo my message. So I'll restart my server, reset Claude, make sure that my MCP server connects. And it says connected now. And still 6 tools because now I have tools and prompts. So now I can go back to Claude and say, echo this message. It's very silly, I know. It echoes this message and then it says this message. Well, let's try a different prompt then. So say you have a prompt that you use often, like summarize this post. Well, I don't want to have to type summarize XYZ post every time. So let's combine some things here. In our prompts, we will include a new object, which will have a name of summarize post. We'll have an args schema, which will have a message. Again, that will be a Z string. Then a description creates a prompt to summarize the specified post. And then we're going to title this summarize post and include a handler, which will take a message, which will be a string, take our messages in an array with content, and that content will have a text as well as a type option. Text will be, please summarize this post, and then we'll just use the message, and this will be text. And let's try this differently. We're going to use a different role. We're going to use the assistant role. So I'm going to restart my server. Then I'm going to restart Claude, pull up my MCP server, make sure that this loads up. Then I can do payload, and then I can see summarize post as well as my echo. So I'm going to summarize post, and I will say lorem ipsum placeholder. All right, so it's first going to find the posts, and then it summarized it for me. Let's see if it can do it with the home page, even though I didn't specify that it can use pages. So it went to posts, found that there was no post labeled home. Now it's at pages. And now it's going to find the home page, and now it summarizes the home page for me. So again, very simple example of what you can do with this. There's really endless things you can do with it, especially since you can include image content and audio content as well. So we've done tools, we've done prompts, and the last part is resources. Oh wait, no, we have handler options as well. Let's look at the handler options first. So if I do handler options, we can change the base path from something like API to CMS. Then let's set our verbose logs to true instead of false. In max duration, I want to set it as 60 still. This will just time out anything that goes for over a minute, but if I wanted something to like run for only 10 seconds, or if I knew it wasn't like a hefty prompt or anything like that, I would set it lower. But this works for me. And that's all that there is for handler options. So we need to restart Claude. Now we can move on to verbose logs, which I have set to true, but they default to false. The verbose logs look like it's doing this here. So if I set verbose logs to false, which is the default, we're not going to see all of those be logged again. So I'm going to leave these as true, just so I can keep up to date with everything that is being done. We have max duration. That's really self-explanatory. If I set this to like 1, first of all, nothing's going to run. It's going to all time out. So we've gone through everything except for resources. It appears that resources is similar to how Cursor has the ability to add documentation to the IDE setting. So why don't we try that, where we can do something like, I should probably do resources. So I can set my URI to be a file instead, and do our MCP server. Then I should just have my readme.md. Let this be text markdown. This will just be my readme. And then finally, readme. And the URI, this should actually be here. Then here in the handler, I can do URI href. So now let's try it this way. So we have an actual file that we're using. Then we'll see in our terminal here that readme is now registered. Tell me about the readme resource. So for resources, feel free to build upon the MCP server and extend its functionality using the resources in that way. But that's all the configuration options that there are for this. So just over here in the documentation, we'll go through just to sum up everything that we talked about. We went over the collections object, which has the slug, the description, and an override for the data generated by the LLM, as well as the response override for the LLM. You can then enable it by CRUD operations, create, update, find, delete. You can disable it either conditionally or just disabling altogether. You can override the actual API key collection, which we did using this department select field. You can create your own tools, which we did here with give me a number, where I just asked it to give me a number between 1 and 100. And that takes the name, description, handler, and parameters, which we covered all of that here in the tools. Then you can select your own prompts, which we used one silly example of echo, but you can also set something like summarize post. And so this summarized some of our posts for us. That way we just have quick access to whatever information we want about our posts. Then we selected our server options, which provided a name and a version for it. And we also mentioned here that all collections require a description, and that description should be very specific about what you want the MCP server to do with those collections. So that's it for the MCP server. I have actually officially coded until my Payload CMS became an MCP server. So mission accomplished this time. I really enjoyed working with this plugin. It is in beta, so I will say that once again, that if you do plan on using the MCP server for anything, be sure to understand that it may not always be how it is in this video. But if there's anything that you want to see, please let me know. Just leave a comment either now or in the future, and I'll be happy to look into it and see if it's something that I'm able to cover. If you're not already, subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me to grow and continue making videos like this, which reminds me, I also have a Patreon. I'll leave the link in the description, and I have a newsletter, Next in Dev, which you can find, I think you can just Google Next in Dev. Regardless, you can find it on my website, nlvcodes.com, where I have also the Patreon link too. So, looking forward to the next one. Thanks for hanging out on this one, and I will see you next time.